Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're hitting the century mark. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And we're 100. This is it. This is the 100th episode.
Is that in dog years?
No, that's actual episodes, real episodes. Okay. That doesn't even count.
I'm 100. You guys are.
Between the three of us, we probably break 100.
Yeah,
but yeah, and this is actually almost essentially the 2-year anniversary of the show. We missed some weeks in between there, but 100th episode. This is about 2 years ago when we started airing episodes. So we're really excited. You heard briefly our guest, and if longtime viewers of the show will know exactly who that is. Professor James Naremore is here to talk to us on our 100th episode. And our topic is the Sight and Sound Poll. Yeah. Now, the Sight and Sound Poll, if you're not familiar with that, the British Film Institute, it's a magazine, Sight and Sound, and they do a poll every 10 years of notable directors and film critics and such, and they put together a list of the greatest films of all time. Everyone does a top 10 list, and every film counts as one. Yeah. Okay, so if 100 people put Citizen Kane on their list, there's 100 votes for Citizen Kane. And our friend James Naremore actually had a real vote. So he emailed me a couple months ago and was like, hey, it might be interesting. I don't know if maybe people want to hear about the process. And I was like, yeah, because this is a huge list. It makes news all over the world for, what is the greatest film of all time. Everyone does a list, but this is really one of the few polls that actually takes an aggregate of such a wide variety of people. And so, Jason, you and I each did our own lists.
Yes.
And so we're gonna share our lists, and Jim's gonna share his list, and we're gonna talk about the lists and the films we put on them and why we put them on there. And thanks, James, so much for coming on the show.
I think it might be fun.
Yeah. So let's get on to our main topic, and the Sight and Sound Poll. Now, the Sight and Sound Poll, you can go to, let's see here, explore.bfi.org.uk, and you can actually look at this whole poll. You can look. What's fascinating about this is that there's no secrecy about it. They literally list every single person who voted with every single movie that they voted on. So I'm actually looking at your list right now, Jim. And I won't spoil it, but you can actually.
I'll give it to you. You want me to give it?
No. We'll go through this little by little here. We'll pay it out, but it's great. They break it down by who voted, who in the critics voted for what, and who in the director's top 100. And you probably saw something about at least the top 10 list in the news about a month or two ago.
Well, and I think the main reason why you and I spoke about this in my day job, which is on the radio, that no longer is Citizen Kane number one considered on the list. It actually is Vertigo, which we've spoken of before. Yeah.
And Citizen Kane was, I don't know how long they've done this. At least
it's been the first ever since it started, which was in the 50s, I believe.
So it's been 60 years, I think, is what they said.
I forgot to look up what the original top 10 were, and I'm sorry, but anyway, it was number one from the beginning, though.
Yeah, but yeah, and this is the first time that it's not been there. And Vertigo is the number one film.
It's worth talking
Hitchcock.
About why that happened, but we can postpone doing that.
Yes.
I've got a theory about that.
Okay. But I'll just list off the top 10 here. Vertigo, Citizen Kane, Tokyo Story, La Règle des Jeux. Oh, is that the rules of the game? Okay, that's the French title. Sunrise, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Searchers, Man with a Movie Camera, Passion of Joan of Arc, and 8.5, the Fellini film. A lot of different films. A lot of different films. There's sci-fi, there's westerns, there's silent film, there's experimental. Yeah. So there's a very broad list of films here. So but so what we're doing today, Jason, you and I each did our own sort of fantasy list, which I gather is a popular thing to do among film critics who didn't actually get invited to fill out a poll. And Jim's got his real list. And Jim, you can maybe tell us a little bit about the process. How did you get invited to do this? Is this the first time you've done this?
It's the first time I've done it, and they just emailed me and said, we'd like you to do this.
Yeah.
And I looked at the stats. They got 846 lists from invitations to over 1,000 people.
Wow.
which were all over the globe this time. They tried to stretch it out.
Yeah.
So not all the people replied. Programmers, academics, distributors, directors, they're all in there. If you don't mind my digressing for a minute, I was in, I'm not trying to, this is relevant. I'm not trying to brag about myself or anything, but I was in New York last week. Chuck Workman, who was here, a documentary filmmaker, is making a movie about Orson Welles. And he had me and Peter Bogdanovich come up there, and he filmed us talking about Citizen Kane.
Oh, cool.
So I spent a fair amount of time talking to Peter, and I asked him, I said, did you vote for this? And he said, well, they asked me to, but I refused. I think this is nonsense. I think I'm totally against it. And I wrote back and told him that. And Nick James, the editor of Sight and Sound, came back to him and said, "Oh, we'd like to have you write and explain your reasoning here, and we'll publish it."
Yeah.
And so they're going to do that.
Oh, cool.
But my own feeling about this is different from his. I think these lists are absurd, but I also think they're fascinating.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out why. Maybe it's because the movies are a newer art form, but nobody ever does this with novels or
That's true.
or music. Maybe they do with pop music. I don't know.
Yeah.
They don't do it with painting.
Yeah, not with classical music at all, but definitely with pop music maybe.
Yeah.
Albums. I see greatest albums.
Albums,
all the time
yeah,
a lot.
Albums are always
right.
good.
Similar to movies, I guess.
Yeah.
So there's something about movies that makes everybody want to make lists.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's kind of sociologically interesting to see how fashions change over the years, and what's up and what's down. And I think it's it can also serve a good purpose. It can recommend films to you that you've never seen.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they may not be things you like, but one of the purpose of the list, I think, should be to advocate maybe for things that not everybody has seen.
Sure.
So, anyway.
Yeah.
So
And that's probably why they do it every 10 years too.
Right. And the only thing about the voting that they said was that if you were going to vote for The Godfather, you could only vote for Godfather 1 or Godfather 2. You couldn't vote for a whole a trilogy or anything like that. And they also allowed you the chance to comment. A lot of people didn't comment. What I wrote at the end, it's very brief, so I'll read it to you. I said, no Hawks, no Godard, no Chaplin or Keaton, no Lang, no Ford, Sternberg or Tourneur, no Griffith, Costa or Kiarostami, no Latin American and no Asian, nothing before 1927 and nothing after 1983. I agonized about my choices and competing agendas and felt that whatever I picked would seem inadequate. I'm honored to participate in this important survey, which I very much support, but I've got a suggestion you've probably heard before. Given that cinema is much older and more various than when Sight and Sound began compiling votes for 10 films, wouldn't it make sense to expand the voting to 20? You could still publish the top 10, but there'd be a larger pool of candidates. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I found myself, just let me list 10 more.
Right.
Well,
you're still going to add up the votes.
Yeah. Well, my initial list was 20.
Yeah.
I started with 20 and then pared it down.
Yeah.
So
I got 20 and I still want to do 30.
Well, I stopped at 20.
Well, that's interesting because mine was 6 and I had to force myself to add more. And that's when I ran into the problem of like, oh, there's so many.
Yeah.
Because I just had a solid 6 and I thought, I got to add to this now?
Yeah, my first 5 or 6 were like no-brainers. Like these are obviously the ones I think are great.
I'm sure I'm going to put these on, right?
Yeah.
And then you hit this wall, and then what's what I say? All these other agendas start coming in. Should it be all Hollywood? Shouldn't there be a woman in the list here somewhere?
Yes.
So I don't know. And shouldn't it be a movie that maybe a lot of people haven't seen? And I don't know whether that's legitimate or not, but it's an interesting phenomenon. It happens when you do this.
Yeah, I mean, do we just want to talk about the theories behind? Because that's what I had to do for myself. I was like, I've got to come up with a credo for myself. Like, here's what I'm aiming for. So here's what I thought of when I decided to do this. I wanted to focus on films that I wanted to have space for 3 types of films on my list. Films that were just personal favorites that I personally thought were the greatest of all time. Second, I was going to lean towards films that I thought were culturally relevant, that films that not necessarily popular, but films that made an impact or changed something about the culture. The third thing I really wanted to make room for was comedy, because I felt like
got to be at least one comedy on the list.
I've been in so many rooms with film people, and it's like, oh well, but that's a comedy, so we don't need to talk about that. It's not worth talking about. I know. And
I mean, I could have made the 10 top ones all comedies.
Yes.
And I did drop one comedy off my list. I did drop Some Like It Hot off my list in favor of another comedy and a satire. But that's one that was really important to me. I wanted it to have comedy to have a good place on the list.
That's a good point. That occurred to me as well. Unfortunately, I only got one comedy on my first list and one on my second list. But anyway.
Yeah, that's kind of, I kind of went along the same lines as you did, Andy. I definitely picked movies that I felt like people should see or people should just be reminded of. And then as of this afternoon, I mean, I was last minute getting my top 10. I ran into a theme on mine, and mine, surprisingly, are all adaptations of books or short stories.
Interesting.
Which I thought was fascinating, because I sat there and I had 8 when I was talking to you earlier. I had 8. And then I sat there and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do about this list. I had like maybe 5 others that I was writing down. And I looked at 3 of them and I thought, wait a second, isn't that a book? And then I looked at another one and was, oh, wait, is that a short story?
Yeah.
Or
I
wait.
think about half the movies that have been made have been based on something else.
Sure. But I just thought that these were just like solid books that people might not even... Maybe there's a possibility that people might not know that there's a movie version that they should see. Another theme that I thought of was, does this movie, because, there's always the joke that, like, basically movies ruin books, after, 1928 or whatever. And so I thought, does the movie either enhance or give me something that the book doesn't? And I thought probably I think at least 8 of these, it definitely does, if you were to read the original material. So that's kind of the theme that I ran into, and I just ran with it because I was so desperate to get the list done, because I just wanted it to be over. Because it's so difficult to just, because it's like, okay, these are my top 10 movies, and that's easy. I just go look at my DVD shelf and just pick out the top 10 that I would give to somebody that I'm meeting for the first time. Well, then it's like cultural, relevance. Yeah.
The other thing, too, that hit me was that I felt like it needed a historical spread. There's too much of a tendency to be... we live in the present and everything's better in the present. And you kind of need to be aware of the past.
And that's what I ran into as well. It's just I could think of some movies in the last 10 years that I think years from now will make many lists, but then it's just like, I don't want to be that guy putting 4 of them on the list, and I think I got 2.
I had one movie from 1999 on my list this morning, and then I was like, no, I can't. Like, I've got one from 1984. That's the latest one on my list.
I have one from 2 years ago.
Okay.
So don't feel so bad. And one from 12 years ago.
I think 1983 was the most on my list, and then in my backup list, there's one from 2007.
Okay.
Yeah. So the film from 1999 I was going to put on my list was The Matrix.
Oh yeah.
Because I felt like that really hit that spot of like cultural relevance, and it literally changed the way people thought about special effects and action.
Yeah,
films.
I mean, it changed the way people made movies.
Yeah. So I left that one off though. So
maybe 10 years from now you can put it on your list.
Yes,
maybe it'll be such a...
Well, and that was the thing. It was like I hit on something this morning that I felt like my list was too safe. And I think it is largely sort of a safe list of films that very few people would look at anything on my list and say, well, I don't think that shouldn't even be in the top 100, much less the top 10. But that's what... I decided to make it a very sort of personal
Can I just
list.
insert something here?
Yes.
I started looking through when you go on the website for the BFI, you can look up specific people and see what they voted for. Okay, right. You don't know a guy named Slavoj Žižek? Have you ever heard of Slavoj Žižek?
I don't think so.
He's a philosopher and cultural critic. He is known throughout the world. They've even made a movie about him. He wrote a famous book about Hitchcock. He's written some wonderful things about Hitchcock. He's a kind of provocateur, but he knows a lot about movies. So I looked up his list, and you know what's on his list? One of the items on his list, The Sound of Music.
Oh, wow.
And I thought to myself, what's he doing? What's he doing? Is he making fun of the list? Does does he really think he could write about this movie and make me think it's interesting? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and that's sort of what I ended up with, is like, this is my list, this is my personal list of the greatest films of all time. So I did make that consolation to the film, but there was one particular filmmaker that I felt like there's a couple filmmakers on here that I think are so interesting that I had to put something of them on here. So that's what I ended up taking out The Matrix for. But so do you guys have any like last drops that you really wanted to mention before we get into these lists?
No, I think at some point afterward, I'd like to talk about just the overall results and some surprises in the overall results. But,
all right. Yeah. So the only other thing, Jim, you told me about this list, they didn't ask you to rank them. They just said put them in alphabetical order.
You list them alphabetically, and each one gets one vote.
That makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
That would just be another awful level to this whole thing.
Exactly.
No, man, yeah. That would have truly driven me crazy.
Yeah. So let's do these in alphabetical order then, and we'll start at the top of the list. So I'll start with mine, and my very first one is one that I think would raise some eyebrows in certain circles, but not for me. Back to the Future.
Okay, yeah.
I really think that I've seen that movie 20, 30 times. I got to see it on the big screen, Jason. We got to see it a couple years ago on the big screen, and it totally blew me away on the big screen. I mean, that movie is just so perfectly edited. It's such a complex idea of what is happening, and he's going back in time and seeing people and going back forward, and how does this work? But it all makes sense in that movie because it's just so perfectly done. It's funny. It's and it holds up. It's 30 years old. I would happily watch it again. Yeah. No problem.
I think you make a good point there. I think you're right. I never really honestly thought about sort of the structure of the movie and how it pieces everything together in such a way that you could see it once and be able to explain the idea to somebody else. Like you'd be able to sit down and explain what happens sort of sequentially, whereas a movie like Looper recently, you really have to see it maybe once or twice, and it deals with time travel.
Or something like Inception, which did not confuse me, but apparently confused a lot of people.
I was probably one of those that needed to see it twice before I fully understood what was going on. But you're right. I as knowing you, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That one on the list makes sense to me. So,
all right. So you want
to go next?
Yeah.
I've got a numerical movie.
Oh, okay.
It's The 39 Steps.
Oh, okay.
Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Belongs on there.
I've seen so many Hitchcock movies, and that's what I struggled with. I was like, I have to put a Hitchcock on here.
Yep.
Do I put Vertigo? No, because it's number one on their list. So I fought that system. I was like, okay, well, do I put Psycho? No, although I just saw it recently on the big screen at the cinema here a couple months ago, and I really struggled with it because I was like, it's such a good movie, and because I'd never seen it with an audience before.
Yeah.
My wife had never, or she was my fiance at the time, had never seen it.
Oh my God.
Jumped at all the right moments, and I was like, this movie still has it. Didn't make the list. 39 Steps, though, I've seen that movie hundreds of times, it feels like.
Yeah.
And I have like the most worn out DVD copy. I mean, it wasn't a great copy in the first place. It's just like one of those like $5 bin copies of the movie. Just randomly saw it. It's like, I've never seen this Hitchcock movie before. Put it in, and I've never regretted it ever since. I think it's really interesting because obviously Hitchcock has made so many movies. He made a lot of movies before this, and then he made a ton of movies after this. It's just that sweet spot of Hitchcock still trying to figure out, still playing with the audience, still playing with the story. And it's one of those that just goes from one place and just takes you on a journey all the way through the whole movie. And it's funny, it's dramatic, it's got everything for me. I can't speak more highly of it. And of course, again, based on a previous adaptation. So
everybody should have a Hitchcock on their list. And
yes.
I found it interesting when I looked through the big long list.
Yeah.
None of Hitchcock's British films made it.
Okay. Yeah.
I think either 4 or 5 of his American films made it.
Yeah, I just
into the top 250, but no British film, and that's too bad because a couple of the British films are every bit as good as the American ones.
I agree.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I have the other thing you can do on their site is you can actually look up each individual film. One person voted for this film. What? I don't believe that.
Oh,
there was somebody who voted for 39 Steps?
Yes, one person.
Good for them.
Well, at least he'd got a vote. Yeah. I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
that's great.
Only one person, though, voted for that.
But you get a number for it?
It's 894.
Okay, so, yeah. I didn't realize I could go down because a couple of mine didn't probably only got one vote.
Yeah,
I don't know where they are down there.
There's a link on the top of this page, and the easiest way that I found to find this is just search for the name of someone you know voted and Sight and Sound. So just search for James Naremore, Sight and Sound, and your list will come up, and then you can get to the rest of the site. This site is buried on there.
It's hard to get to.
It's hard to find, but there's an all films link, and you can actually look up every single film. And
well,
see
it deserves, like I said, it deserves at least one vote.
I'm very
if not more.
surprised that was not voted for more.
Of course, it's not from 1935. Just to reference it. I mean, it's like I said before, a lot of his sort of. I mean, even before some of his British films. Still, I mean, he still did a number of things after that. Yeah. Then of course he really hit his stride when he started doing American films. So it's on my list, and like I said, I struggled with that.
I can think of at least 3 of his British films. 4 that I think are masterpieces. So,
All right, Jim, what's tops on your list?
My first one is remember this is alphabetical.
Yes.
My is L'Âge d'Or, The Age of Gold by Louis Buñuel, 1930. This qualifies as a silent film. It has a synchronized soundtrack, sound effects.
Sure.
It's a surrealist film. It comes right after his most famous short surrealist avant-garde film, Chien Andalou, The Andalusian Dog. And but anyway, I like this one better. And it is still anarchic and incredibly iconoclastic and witty and attacks Jesus. Shows a guy squishing a bug on the street. Has all these dark elements in it, but it's also very funny. And makes erotic jokes. Anyway, L'Âge d'Or.
Interesting. Okay, so the next
you got to have a Buñuel on your list or somewhere. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. In fact, when I pulled The Matrix, I did it because I had to put on a Buñuel.
Okay.
I had to put on a Buñuel because he's just had the cinema has brought Buñuel into my life, and I've been devouring
he's one
as
of the
much
movies.
of
He was one of
stuff.
Hitchcock's faves.
Yeah. The second film on my list is probably the safest possible film. Not the, I don't know where it is on the actual list, but it's the safe, good movie, Casablanca, which we're going to talk about tomorrow night, and hopefully you've already been there because this will air after that. I'm not going to talk about it. We're going to have a whole episode about Casablanca.
Oh yeah.
Again, another one of those films that I think is just so culturally relevant that it's in a world where you've got this thing that's a script and a bunch of actors and a director, and you don't know what it's going to be, and then you get the final product. A lot of things can go wrong in that process, and in Casablanca, all those things seem to go wrong, but they still came out with this perfect little thing that still holds up 60 years later, 70 years later.
Yeah.
So that one's definitely on my list.
I can't argue that.
Yeah.
But again, we'll be hashing that out 24 hours from now.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to it. Second on my list is Giant from 1956, the last movie that James Dean did.
James Dean.
Yeah.
Yep.
And actually came out after his death, so he didn't actually even get to see it on the big screen. It's got him, Rock Hudson, Elizabeth Taylor. It's a black and white movie.
No, it's color.
Oh, it's color. It is a color.
Yeah.
See, I remember it's black and white. That's so weird, but it is in color.
It was shot in the same place as There Will Be Blood.
Yep.
Little town in Texas. Yeah.
It was.
Interesting.
So it's about basically oil barons and sort of how that works out. It's along the same lines as another movie I'll talk about here in a bit, but it basically stretches over a long period of time. It's a long movie.
It's truly an epic movie.
It's about 3.5.
Yeah, it covers several generations of American history.
It does, and so it goes, sort of from that oil boom all the way through. I think out of all the James Dean movies that he was in, I think it's the most underappreciated role that he did. I thought he's everyone always sort of comments on like, oh, Rebel Without a Cause, like there's this boiling anger in him, and I'm like, I feel like there's a lot more going on in this role. I think it's more quiet, but in comparison to that,
he's a character that you start out sympathizing with and wind up disliking.
Exactly, and it's just you see him at a really young part of his life, and it stretches all the way to the very end. And you're right. It's just such a iconic role for him that I don't think anybody mentions ever when you talk about James. It's not obviously not the first thing you think of. You think of him in the the red jacket and the jeans and running around and switchblade. It's just such a wonderful role for him. But it's also a great role for Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor. I think they also do a lot in this movie, especially towards the end of the movie. It has sort of this. Rock Hudson does the very iconic thing where he stands up, and he just, I can't exactly remember how the setup is, but they're in a diner, and what is the comment that guy makes?
It's a racist
It's
comment.
a racist comment, and and he's such a racist, like in the middle of the movie, you just are like, this guy is such a, but then he does the right thing and just nails this guy right in the face, and you're just like, yes, like you're just so happy that he changes.
Yeah, but his character has grown through the movie too.
Exactly.
Yeah. At first you find him too conservative or whatever, but then he learns as things go along.
Yeah, and it like you said, it sort of takes across many. It's you're seeing Texas change, and then the people change at the same time, and then it's like almost as if they're both dealing with it at the same time. So it's such a great movie. I don't know if I've ever met anybody that's spoken of it. That's the thing. I don't even know how I got around to seeing it. I own it. I think it was in the James Dean box set. I think that's how I got it.
The director is George Stevens.
Yeah,
who's
George
a very
Stevens.
good director.
Yeah. So it's a really, really solid movie. I highly recommend it. It's definitely worth like every hour that you're going to spend watching it. So
yeah.
My second one actually made the top 10 list. It's Man with a Movie Camera, Dziga Vertov, 1929. Have either of you ever seen this film?
I started watching this and I didn't get very far into it, but I've seen the first 20
I used to show it to students all the time. It used to not come with a musical soundtrack. Now there is one on the DVD. It's a documentary, but it's also an avant-garde film. It's a film about a day in the city. But it synthesizes all the theories about montage that the Russians had, and it not only shows the city. It's actually the city is made up of various Russian cities. You seem to be going through a single day, but you're actually geographically all over the place. Okay. But it's also about the making of the film. So you see the cameraman, you see the editing of the film. And it's like a great symphonic thing. So it's another silent movie. It enabled me to get a documentary in, But anyway, so it actually made the list.
Very good. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.